He stayed silent for days, but when Kenneth Copeland finally spoke after Gloria's passing, no one was prepared for what he revealed. Behind decades of televised sermons and perfect smiles was a secret so personal, so unexpected, it stunned even their closest followers. What he shared not only rewrote everything people thought they knew about Gloria, it left the world questioning what had been hidden all along. The truth is finally out, and it changes everything. To most people, watching from the outside, Gloria Copeland was the picture of calm grace. She stood beside Kenneth Copeland for decades, always polished, always smiling, always delivering her message of faith with steady conviction. Her soft voice and gentle manner made her seem like a spiritual mother figure, someone who led with peace and kindness. But, according to Kenneth himself, after her passing, that public image was only part of the truth. Behind the scenes, at home and away from the cameras, there was another side of Gloria that few ever saw. She was not the soft, always sweet figure people assumed she was. At home, Gloria was often cold, sharp, and difficult to approach emotionally. Kenneth admitted that over the years, she became more controlling, more distant, and far less patient than she ever appeared in public. She wanted things a certain way, and when things didn't go that way, she didn't hold back her disappointment. Her faith was real, but it came with expectation, high expectations. For everyone, Kenneth revealed moments in their marriage where he felt like he was walking on eggshells. Gloria could go from silent disapproval to sharp criticism without warning. Sometimes she wouldn't speak to him for days. Not out of sorrow, but out of principle. She expected complete alignment, not just spiritually but in every detail of their lives. If he made a mistake, forgot something, or even questioned her direction, he often felt punished emotionally. And what hurt the most was how quiet it all was. She didn't shout. She didn't argue. But she could freeze a room with a single look. He said she had a way of making her disappointment feel heavier than any sermon. "I would have rather had a fight than the silence," Kenneth said in one rare, honest interview. The silence could last forever. What made it more confusing was the way she switched back into public mode so effortlessly. On stage, at church, or during their television broadcasts, Gloria became warm and inspirational again, talking about healing, love, and God's mercy. But when the lights went off, so did the charm. Kenneth described it as emotional whiplash. The woman who held his hand on stage could be the same woman who ignored him for hours at home. It wasn't just Kenneth who noticed the shift. Former staff members over the years quietly left, rarely saying why, but often hinting that the behind-the-scenes environment was difficult. Some felt that Gloria was not as forgiving or warm as her public messages suggested. Others described her as brilliant, yes, but also quick to judge, slow to forgive, and nearly impossible to please. None of this means she was evil. Kenneth never said that. But he admitted that for decades they both lived inside a carefully crafted image. And while the ministry touched millions of lives, the people closest to them often felt left out of that blessing. "We built something powerful," Kenneth said, "but power can sometimes harden the heart." After her death, Kenneth said he felt a strange mix of grief and relief. He missed her deeply. She had been his partner, his co-preacher, his closest companion. But he also felt a strange weight lifting. The weight of secrets, of silence, of years spent trying to protect an image instead of dealing with the truth. And now, he says, it's time people know that even those who seem like saints can have storms raging inside them. Not to shame her legacy, but to tell the full truth. Because sometimes the most faithful thing we can do is be honest about the people we've loved, even if their story wasn't always easy to live with. In the early days of Kenneth and Gloria Copeland's ministry, there was a different kind of energy. Things were simpler, humbler. They were building something together, teaching, praying, dreaming. And Gloria? She was sharp, focused, and powerful in her words. People respected her instantly. She could walk into a room and own it without ever raising her voice. But over time, something changed. As the ministry grew and their influence expanded across TV, books, conferences, and global networks, Gloria began to carry herself differently. Power, it seemed, became more important than people. Kenneth Copeland later admitted that at a certain point, Gloria wasn't just leading anymore, she was ruling. And ruling came with its own rules. She wanted things done a certain way, not just in church, at home, in meetings, during travel. Everything had to meet her standard. She ran the ministry like a machine, and anything that slowed it down was seen as a problem to be fixed, not a person to be cared for. Many people on the inside started to feel it. Staff members who had once felt like family slowly began to feel like tools, useful until they weren't. Over the years, several quietly walked away. They didn't speak out publicly. They didn't want to hurt the ministry or their own reputations. But those who had been there long enough saw what was happening. Gloria was more concerned with how things looked than how people felt. Kenneth said he remembered moments where someone on their team would come forward with a personal problem, a sick family member, a mental health struggle, or just burnout. And Gloria's response was always the same. Stay strong. Push through. We don't have time for weakness. To her, showing emotion or taking time off was seen as spiritual failure. If you had faith, you kept moving. If you loved God, you didn't slow down. She believed in the message, no doubt about it, but the compassion that once softened her voice began to fade behind a wall of performance and pressure. She had thousands to preach to, schedules to keep, and goals to hit, and when people couldn't keep up, they were left behind. It wasn't always cruel, but it wasn't kind either. Kenneth opened up about how it affected their home too. Even with family, Gloria kept that same sharp focus. She expected everyone, including their children and close relatives, to rise to her level of discipline. There wasn't much room for grace. If someone made a mistake, she didn't explode, but she didn't forget either. Forgiveness wasn't freely given. It had to be earned. Sometimes, people in the family felt like they were working for her approval more than receiving her love, and yet, she always had the right words on stage. Her sermons were full of hope, encouragement, and powerful affirmations. People walked away from her teachings feeling inspired. But the Gloria behind the scenes wasn't always living what she preached. Kenneth admitted that he started to feel the pressure himself, not just as a husband but as a co-leader. He had to support her publicly, even when he disagreed privately. I loved her deeply, he said, but sometimes I wondered if the message was bigger than the people hearing it. There was one moment that stuck with him. A young woman who had worked with their team for years came into Gloria's office in tears. She had lost her father unexpectedly and was struggling to keep herself together. Instead of offering a hug or a kind word, Gloria reportedly said, "This is the time to show strength, not fall apart." The woman left the room crushed. She never returned to work after that day. Kenneth said it haunted him. She needed compassion, he whispered. She got a command. As the years went on, that kind of moment became more common. The ministry still grew, but so did the emotional distance. Kenneth sometimes felt like he was watching a wall go up, one brick at a time. Gloria's vision was laser-focused. She wanted results. She wanted control. And slowly, she stopped seeing people for who they were and started seeing them for what they could deliver. He didn't say these things to slander her. In fact, he was careful with his words. He loved her to the very end. But after her passing, he felt a duty to share the full picture, the good and the bad. Because without the full truth, her legacy would remain only half true. She was brilliant, fierce, committed, he said. But she also forgot how to be soft. There were times when Kenneth tried to speak to her about it. He'd suggest slowing down, showing more grace, giving people room to breathe. But Gloria would always respond with the same line. God didn't call us to slow down. He called us to lead. And maybe that's how she truly saw it. Maybe she believed the only way to carry the weight of leadership was to push harder and expect more. But in doing so, she lost touch with the gentleness that had once made her so approachable. In the final years of her life, Kenneth noticed something shift again. Gloria grew quieter, more reflective. She didn't apologize for her ways, but she began to spend more time alone, journaling, praying, maybe even wrestling with some of the same thoughts he had. Maybe, in her own way, she knew. When she passed, the public mourned the strong, fearless woman who had built an empire of faith. But Kenneth mourned the complicated, powerful, and sometimes distant woman he had loved his whole life. And he decided that now, after all the lights had faded, the truth could be told, not out of anger, but out of love. Because loving someone means remembering them fully, even the hard parts. Gloria Copeland changed lives. That's true. But behind that legacy was a woman who sometimes put the mission above the moment, the platform above the person, and power above compassion. From the outside, the Copeland family looked like the perfect spiritual dynasty. Kenneth and Gloria stood side by side for decades, raising children, building a ministry, and preaching about love, unity, and divine purpose. They spoke often about the strength of family and the importance of godly homes. People looked up to them, not just as preachers, but as parents, role models, and living proof of doing life God's way. But behind the cameras, inside their own household, the truth was far more complicated. Kenneth later revealed that the Copeland home wasn't always peaceful. In fact, many of the same tensions that Gloria projected onto the ministry slowly crept into their private life. Expectations were high, too high. Gloria ran a tight ship, and it didn't stop at work. At home, she had a clear idea of how everyone should act, what success looked like, and what kind of people her children should become. Anything less than that wasn't just disappointing, it was seen as unacceptable. As the children grew older, they began to feel the pressure. While most kids were navigating school, friendships, and figuring out who they were, the Copeland children were growing up under the weight of a public spotlight. People expected them to be spiritual prodigies, always well-behaved, always full of faith, always ready to speak like their parents did. And Gloria? She expected even more. She wanted excellence in everything, from their grades, to how they spoke, to the way they represented the family name. But perfection is a heavy burden, especially for kids. Over time, those demands didn't inspire, they created distance. One of their children, according to Kenneth, began quietly pulling away in their teenage years. It wasn't dramatic. No major fights. Just a slow fading into the background. They stopped showing up at events, kept conversations short, and eventually stepped away from the spotlight completely. Gloria didn't talk about it much, and when asked, she'd say, "They're just figuring things out. They'll come back around." But privately, Kenneth saw it differently. He noticed the small signs: missed birthdays, unanswered messages, long stretches of silence between them. The relationship had cracked, and no one was talking about it. Gloria had a way of freezing things she didn't want to deal with. And this was one of them. She wasn't angry, exactly, but she couldn't accept the idea that someone in her family would walk away from what she had built, what she believed was God's calling. And so, instead of reaching out in vulnerability, she pulled back. Pride got in the way of reconciliation, and slowly, the silence between them grew into something deeper. Kenneth, torn between being a husband and a father, tried to bridge the gap. He'd encourage her to write a letter, make a phone call, or just open the door. But Gloria wasn't one to bend easily. "They know where I stand," she'd say. "If they want to talk, they know where to find me." That posture, firm, proud, and closed, kept the family fractured for years. Even during family holidays or ministry gatherings, the tension lingered. Smiles were practiced, conversations stayed surface level, and certain topics were completely off limits. Everyone tiptoed around the brokenness, pretending it didn't exist. But Kenneth felt it in his bones. The air in those rooms was heavy, like something important was missing, and everyone knew it. It wasn't just about one child. Other family members too felt the sting of Gloria's high expectations. Nieces, nephews, even longtime friends of the family. Some had drifted away over the years, not out of rebellion, but out of quiet hurt. They felt judged, like they could never be enough in her eyes. Whether it was career choices, life partners, or spiritual beliefs, Gloria struggled to show grace when people didn't align with her worldview. And yet, there was no explosion, no big dramatic falling out. That was the strangest part. These were quiet fractures, slow, unspoken breakages that were never named out loud. Gloria kept moving forward with her work, preaching about forgiveness and restoration, while her own relationships sat unresolved. Kenneth confessed that toward the end of Gloria's life, he began to wonder if she regretted how she handled things. In her final months, she became more withdrawn. She spent long hours alone, reading her Bible, writing in a journal, and listening to old gospel records. Sometimes, he'd catch her staring off into the distance, as if replaying memories she hadn't shared with anyone. One evening, not long before she passed, Kenneth gently asked her if there was anything she wanted to say, anyone she wanted to talk to or make peace with. She stayed quiet for a long time. Then finally she said, "Some things are just too far gone, Kenneth. You pray for them instead." That line stayed with him, because in that moment he realized Gloria had made peace with some of her decisions, but not all of them. She didn't apologize, but she knew. She knew there were people in their family who carried quiet pain, words they wished they'd heard, hugs they never received. And maybe, just maybe, she felt it too. After her death, a few family members who hadn't spoken in years came to the memorial. Some cried, some stood quietly in the back. There were no speeches from them, just silent presence. Kenneth said it was both beautiful and heartbreaking to see people mourning someone they had loved, even if love hadn't always been returned the way they needed. Family is never easy, especially when it's mixed with public pressure, spiritual authority, and the fear of disappointment. Gloria Copeland built a powerful legacy, but it came at a cost. And part of that cost was paid in strained relationships, lost time, and conversations that were never had. Kenneth now looks back with clearer eyes. He doesn't blame her for everything. He knows Gloria was shaped by her own pain, her own upbringing, her own belief that strength meant never showing weakness. But he also believes that the greatest legacy anyone can leave isn't in sermons or books. It's in the love they gave, the grace they offered, and the bridges they built while they were still here. And sadly, in the Copeland home, some of those bridges were never finished. As the years went by and the Copeland empire continued to grow, Gloria's presence on stage started to fade just a little. She still preached from time to time, still smiled for the cameras, still sat beside Kenneth on their broadcasts. But there was a noticeable shift. The fire in her tone softened, the intensity in her delivery gave way to something quieter, more measured. It wasn't weakness, it was something else, something that looked, from the outside, a lot like reflection. Kenneth saw it first. He knew her better than anyone. He noticed how she'd pause more during conversations, how she spent more time in her private prayer room, sitting with her Bible open but not always reading, sometimes just sitting. He once walked in on her staring out the window, not moving, not praying aloud, just holding a worn photo of their children. When he asked what was on her mind, she simply said, "I'm thinking about how fast it all went." To the public, Gloria still looked strong, wise, in control. But inside, a quiet storm was moving. Not a storm of regret exactly, but something like it. A slow, deep stirring. She wasn't running from her past, but she wasn't pretending it hadn't happened either. In those last few years, Gloria wasn't trying to fix everything. She was trying to understand it. People often talk about redemption like it's a dramatic moment, a confession, a big apology, a tearful reunion. But sometimes redemption doesn't look like that. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's just sitting with the truth, your truth, and choosing not to run from it anymore. Gloria never stood up and admitted she had been too hard on her family. She didn't send out letters or issue public statements. That wasn't her style. But Kenneth believed she started seeing things more clearly. He recalled one evening not long before she fell ill, when she turned to him and said, "You know, I spent so much time trying to be right. I think I forgot what it felt like to just be kind." That line hit him like a weight. Not because it was shocking, but because it was the first time she had said something like that out loud. He didn't say anything in response. He just nodded and sat beside her in silence. It was one of the most honest moments they ever shared. There were other small signs too. Gloria became gentler with her grandchildren, less demanding. She let them be messy, loud, playful. She didn't scold, she smiled. She watched them like someone trying to hold on to a moment that was slipping through her fingers. Kenneth said it was the first time he saw her truly present, with no agenda, no schedule, no teaching point, just love. A few members of the family who had distanced themselves even came back around during that time. There were still unspoken things between them, of course. Not everything was healed, but there were hugs, there were shared meals, there was laughter again. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Kenneth believed Gloria didn't need to say the words, "I'm sorry." Her actions said enough. But even in these moments of softness, she remained who she had always been, strong-willed, disciplined, devoted to her faith. She didn't want pity, and she didn't want to be seen as weak. She simply wanted peace, and that became her focus in her final season. Peace with herself, peace with her family, peace with the God she had served so fiercely all her life. In private, Kenneth noticed she started writing letters. Not long ones, just short notes. Some scripture, some thoughts, sometimes just a simple "I love you" scribbled in her careful handwriting. She left them in drawers, in books, tucked into journals. Some were addressed, some weren't. It was her quiet way of leaving pieces of herself behind. Not teachings, not commands, just love. Pure and simple. Was that redemption? Maybe. Or maybe it was just reflection. The kind that comes when you've lived a long life, full of big choices and big consequences. Gloria never pretended to be perfect, but she did spend a lot of years trying to live up to the image people had of her. In the end, she let that go. She let herself just be Gloria. Not the preacher, not the icon, not the spiritual giant. Just the woman, the mother, the wife, the flawed human soul. Kenneth said that in her final days, they didn't talk much about ministry. They didn't plan the next broadcast or go over sermons. They talked about their first house, their favorite road trips, the time they laughed so hard they couldn't breathe. They talked about the ordinary things, the stuff no one ever saw, but that meant the most. And in those conversations, Gloria smiled more than she had in years. Her eyes didn't hold the same sharp focus. They softened. She wasn't trying to prove anything anymore. She wasn't trying to control the narrative. She was just letting herself be loved. After she passed, Kenneth went through her prayer journals. In the final entry, written just a few weeks before her death, she had scribbled one line, "Lord, help me love better than I lead." He said he stared at those words for a long time. They weren't flashy, they wouldn't go viral, but they were real. And they told the story of a woman who, after a lifetime of trying to change the world, realized the most important change was the one happening inside her. So was it redemption, or was it just reflection? Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe what matters is that she saw the cracks. She felt them. She didn't deny them. And in her own quiet way, she tried to make peace with them, not through grand gestures, but through presence, through memory, through choosing, at the very end, to be gentle. In the end, that's all any of us can hope for, to face our lives honestly, to hold both the beautiful and the broken, and to leave behind more love than damage. And Gloria Copeland, for all her strength and all her storms, left behind a final season of softness that still speaks louder than all the years of control ever did.